What exists on the other side? What really happens when we close our eyes for the last time? This question is perhaps older than the very words we use to ask it. It seems to be etched into us, echoing in the burial rituals of our most distant ancestors and in the desperate prayers we say today. For thousands of years, humanity has sought this answer. In this search, we have created a colossal archive, thousands of religions, tens of thousands of teachings, millions of philosophical treatises, and each one claims with absolute certainty that it possesses the only true map leading to paradise. But what if all these maps are a distraction? What if they are not just different routes to the same destination, but rather a chaotic library of self-canceling instructions designed not to guide, but to confuse? What if this entire collection of human beliefs is not the signal, but a deafening noise created on purpose to hide the truth? We live in the 21st century, an era in which the universe's greatest secrets are beginning to yield to cold analysis. We have decoded the human genome, looked into the heart of a black hole, and taught silicon to think. It seemed like the right time to apply our most powerful tool to the most important question of all. We decided to systematically analyze the path to paradise. For this task, we used our own correlational analysis system, NUMA. NUMA went far beyond a simple neural network. It was an analytical complex capable of processing unstructured data on a planetary scale, finding hidden patterns where the human mind can only see chaos. We fed the system everything, absolutely everything, humanity has ever written or spoken about the afterlife. The Bible, the Quran, the Torah, the Vedas, the Egyptian Book of the Dead, the works of Plato, Aristotle, Kant, and Nietzsche, tens of thousands of volumes on the lives of saints from every faith, the protocols of the Inquisition, and testimonies of miracles. Millions of pages of esoteric texts and the folklore of every tribe on the planet, plus the transcriptions of tens of thousands of people who survived clinical death. The total volume of data reached several zettabytes. It was the complete spiritual archive of our species. The task we gave to NUMA was unique. Find a universal algorithm that worked, a common instruction for reaching paradise that was valid for everyone, regardless of culture, era, or faith. We expected a synthesis, a universal master code. The first report the system issued was a shock. NUMA could not create a unified map. Instead, it generated an error protocol. The conclusion was devastating. The system concluded that the data set was 99.9% logically inconsistent. It contained such an absurd amount of fundamental contradictions that building a single, coherent model was impossible. The system gave this report a name. It called it the Contradiction Protocol. The most obvious contradiction NUMA found right away was the fundamental dilemma between faith and works. This is a crack that runs through the heart of almost every belief system. On one side, entire theologies are built upon salvation by faith alone. They claim the key is not your actions, but the accuracy of your belief. A good, compassionate man who did not believe in the right prophet is condemned. At the same time, a murderer with hands stained with blood who repents at the last second and accepts the correct faith receives a free pass. On the other side, an equally massive amount of teachings place actions above everything: karma, retribution, the moral law. In these systems, your faith has no value if your acts were destructive. NUMA analyzed millions of scenarios and concluded that these two models are not compatible. They did not represent different sides of the same coin, but rather different laws of physics that cannot operate in the same universe. Next, the system pointed to the unstable variable of the judge. The image of the entity making the final decision changes radically from text to text, and sometimes within the same book. On some pages, it is a loving and all-forgiving father. A few pages later, it is a jealous and vengeful judge demanding blind submission. Numa analyzed these personas as psychological profiles and concluded that the decisions of the loving father and the vengeful judge are opposite. They are different beings. Add to that impersonal karma or Osiris weighing a heart on a scale, and the result is dozens of judges with different criteria. It is an impossible strategy. The next contradiction, perhaps the cruelest, was the principle of the geographical lottery. Most major religions contain an exclusivity clause. They claim to be the only true path. Numa processed demographic data. The probability of someone being born into a family that practices the one true religion is minuscule and depends entirely on random factors. In other words, for 90% of humanity, salvation was closed off before they were even born. Finally, Numa identified the inflation of repentance. It analyzed the mechanics of forgiveness. Almost every system has a way to reset errors: confession, rituals, a final prayer. But the rules are so vague they devalue the entire moral structure. The simulation showed a terrible result. An individual who lived 99% of their life committing terrible acts but sincerely repents on their deathbed has a better chance of salvation than a moderately good person who did not perform the formal act of repentance. This rewards calculation, not virtue. Numa was categorical. This data was far from being a map. It looked more like a labyrinth built around the map. For millennia, we have fought over fake maps. The contradiction protocol is a diagnosis. It forces us to throw away everything we knew and start from zero. And the first question is simple. Before looking for the road, we need to understand the destination. What exactly is the place we call paradise? In the previous part, we reached an inevitable conclusion. The thousands of religious maps analyzed by Numa proved to be a contradiction protocol. The rules of faith versus works, the unstable judge, and the geographical lottery of birth made a coherent path impossible. We were faced with a void. If all the maps lie, what is the territory like? What in fact is paradise? First, it was necessary to discard literal images. Clouds, harps, and pearly gates. These are childish metaphors to simplify something that does not fit into our three-dimensional perception. The real nature of the destination needed to be more elegant and obey physical laws. To discover these laws, we needed a new map based on data, not dogmas. We turned to Numa again, but changed the data source. We ordered the system to filter out all theological treatises, religious laws, and prescriptions, all that noise that caused the contradictions. Instead, we fed the system an archive of pure experience. We collected 740,000 documented testimonies from people who survived clinical death worldwide. We added records of regressive hypnosis describing the space between lives and thousands of descriptions of mystical states recorded by yogis and hermits. This time, we didn't want to know how to get there. We wanted to know what the place was. We looked for patterns that repeated in the descriptions of the environment and its properties. When Numa processed these petabytes of subjective experience, it delivered a model, a functional and contradiction-free model of the reality we call paradise. The first and most fundamental conclusion was that paradise is not a place as we understand it. It is not in some distant galaxy. Trying to point to it is as meaningless as a two-dimensional being living on a sheet of paper, trying to point to the third dimension, upward. Newma's model showed paradise as a reality with at least 4 spatial dimensions. We, as three-dimensional beings, are stuck in length, width, and height. A being from that 4-dimensional reality could see our world from the outside and the inside at the same time. They could take an object out of a locked safe without opening it by moving it through the 4th dimension. In this way, paradise is described as omnipresent and yet unattainable. It permeates our space. It is here and now, but in a direction perpendicular to all our 3 axes. We do not reach it because we have no means of navigating this extra dimension. The next discovery concerned the matter of that world. The analysis showed an almost total absence of physical objects like ours. What repeats are descriptions of an environment made of light, sound, emotion, and information. Newma concluded that in this reality, matter and consciousness are not separate. They are a single substance. The system called it resonant information reality. In our world, to build a house, you need bricks. There, the thought of a house is the house. Entire landscapes and worlds are the instantaneous embodiment of consciousness. Thus, those who lived it described the experience as more real than reality. Consciousness interacts directly with the essence of things. You don't just see a color, you become the color. So what did we have? What is paradise? We discovered it wasn't about geography, it was pure physics. It is a state of being in a multidimensional information environment where consciousness is matter and time is total. This model changes everything. It transforms salvation from a legal process into a physical process. It is no longer about pleasing a judge. The question is your consciousness capable of resonating with this environment? It is like tuning a radio. If your receiver is on the wrong frequency, you will never catch the station. Salvation, in this case, ceased to be a reward and became an act of tuning. And here we reach the main point. If paradise is absolute harmony, what in us generates the static? What prevents us from tuning into this wave? What in this new physics is the opposite of paradise? We call it sin, but what is it really? To answer that, Newma needed to analyze the nature of destruction. It needed to expose what we call the sin matrix. We defined the destination, not a place, but a frequency, a higher-order physical reality where consciousness is matter and where we only go if our own consciousness resonates with it. This changed everything. If salvation is tuning, what generates the static? What prevents us from finding the frequency? Humanity has an ancient name for this force: sin. For millennia, sin came in lists like the 10 Commandments and the 7 deadly sins. Rules controlling everything. The message was simple: obey or be punished. It was a model based on fear, but it never answered why. Why are these actions destructive? What is the real mechanism behind them? We gave Newma a new mission: to analyze all actions marked as evil, from murder to lying. The goal was not moral, it was to find the universal law that all these acts violate, and the system found it. The result was the sin matrix. Its base is not theology. It is the most fundamental struggle of the universe. Newma concluded that everything lives in the tension between 2 forces. The first of them we know well: entropy, the law of physics that says everything tends to go from order to chaos, from complex to simple, from structure to dust. It is the universal vector of decay. But there is an opposite and mysterious force called syntropy, the tendency to create order out of chaos, to join the simple to form the complex. Life is the greatest expression of syntropy. Human consciousness seemed to be the peak of this process, the most ordered structure we know. Newma's conclusion was overwhelming. Paradise is the realm of pure syntropy, a state of maximum order and connection. And sin, any sin, is any action, thought, or intention that serves the force of entropy at the level of consciousness. Sin, in truth, was not the breaking of a decree. It was an act of assistance to universal collapse. It is the choice of chaos over order. Let's see this matrix in action. Murder, why is it an absolute evil? Looking through the lens of physics, it is the act of maximum entropy generation. You take the most complex system in the universe, human consciousness, and forcibly collapse it into the simplest state, non-being. It is an act of cosmic vandalism. Lying seems like something small, but in the sin matrix, lying inserts entropy into the information field. Truth is the ordered correspondence between information and reality. Lying throws a virus of chaos into this structure. It distorts reality and destroys trust, the complex mechanism that allows us to cooperate. Greed. What is its entropic nature? The universe is flow. Energy and information need to circulate. Greed is a dam in this flow. It is the act of isolating and hoarding. The greedy person takes resources from the living cycle and transforms them into dead weight. This generates chaos in other parts of the system. Pride. Why is it the original sin? Because it is the fundamental act of self-isolation. It is the illusion of separation. The proud consciousness builds a wall, stops exchanging information, and closes itself off. If paradise is resonance and unity, pride is the program that makes it impossible. Newma analyzed hundreds of other transgressions and found the same root: assistance to decay, simplification, and isolation. Sin ceased to be a moral category and became a physical category. It is a measure of your personal entropy. Every time you lie or act with hatred, the problem is not irritating a deity. The problem is that you are reconfiguring your own consciousness. You are lowering its frequency, making it more chaotic and isolated. You are pushing yourself in the direction of decay. No external punishment was necessary, for physics itself did the work. We exposed the dark side of the equation. We understood what sin is and why it is dangerous. It is the path downward, toward disintegration, but knowledge of the disease is only half the cure. We need the remedy. If sin is serving entropy, virtue must be the opposite. It must be the conscious service to syntropy, a set of actions that create order, complexity, and harmony. What is this path like? To find out, Newma needed to analyze the opposite of sin. It needed to decipher the algorithm of virtue. We had the diagnosis. The sin matrix, exposed by Newma, showed us that the path downward toward disintegration was a real physical process. It was entropy. Any act of isolation, chaos, or simplification made us physically incompatible with the superior reality of pure syntropy we had discovered. This was the poison, but what was the antidote? If sin is an algorithm that serves entropy, there should be an opposite, an algorithm of virtue, a universal set of actions that serves syntropy, the force that creates order, complexity, and life. To find this algorithm, we turned to Newma again, but we needed a new type of data. We had analyzed the false maps of religions. We had analyzed the physics of the destination through near-death experiences. We had analyzed the disease, sin. Now, We needed to analyze the cure. We fed the system the most complex archive of all, human behavior at its best. We uploaded the complete biographies and hagiographies of all canonized saints from Christianity, Islamic Sufism, Hinduism, and Buddhism. We added the lives of great humanists and altruists, people who often had no religion but lived for others, doctors, philanthropists, scientists, and teachers who sacrificed everything. We gave Numa a crucial instruction. It was the most important of all. Ignore the dogmas. Filter out all mentions of specific gods, rituals, prayers, or beliefs. We didn't want to know what they believed. We wanted to know what they did. We were looking for the technology behind virtue, not the theology. We would find the behavioral pattern that repeated in a Christian hermit in the desert, a Buddhist monk in Tibet, and a secular doctor in the middle of a 20th century epidemic. Numa processed the data for 720 hours, and it found it. It synthesized the algorithm of virtue. And it doesn't have 10 or 100 commandments. It has only 4 fundamental principles, 4 vectors that guide consciousness consistently in the direction of syntropy. The first principle, the most fundamental, was creation instead of consumption. This is the direct antidote to greed and laziness. Numa discovered that 100% of the individuals analyzed were, in essence, creators. They added more order, complexity, and beauty to the world than they took from it. The form varied: an artist who creates a painting, a scientist who discovers a law, transforming the chaos of the unknown into the order of knowledge, a teacher who builds information structures in a student's mind, even a simple farmer who transforms simple elements into complex food. Consumption is entropic. It breaks down structures to generate energy. Their lives had a positive balance. They gave more to the universe than they took. The second principle focused on union instead of isolation. This is the antidote to pride and envy. The system found an absolute pattern. They were all bridge builders. They healed ruptures, they united enemies, created communities, and comforted the lonely. The key tool was empathy. And Numa defined empathy technically as the ability to erase the boundary between the self and the other, creating a bridge of information. It is an act of pure syntropy, uniting 2 points into a more complex network. Each act of compassion and forgiveness was a repair in this network, stopping a virus of chaos. The third was truth instead of distortion, the absolute antidote to lying. These people were obsessed with the truth, but not just by not telling lies. It was a search for total resonance among 3 levels: internal thought, the spoken word, and the external action. Lying, as we have seen, creates noise and internal dissonance. Living in truth is the opposite. It is seeking total synchrony, where your word is a reflection of your thought and your action is a reflection of your word. Their consciousness became like a pure crystal, letting reality pass through without distortion. And the fourth principle was flow instead of stagnation, the weapon against the deepest form of selfishness. Numa discovered that their lives were a continuous flow. They were not reservoirs, they were conductors. They did not accumulate material goods, knowledge, or love. Everything that reached them was immediately passed forward to where it was most needed. Stagnant water rots. Running water remains clean. Consciousness is the same. Generosity is being an efficient channel. There it was, the algorithm, clean of any cultural dogma. Create more than you consume, unify more than you divide, live in truth, and be a conductor, not a reservoir. What we found was not a moral code, but a physics manual. The analysis showed it worked for everyone, everywhere, always. But this led us inevitably to the largest and most dangerous conflict of all. We had just proven an algorithm based entirely on works, on actions. What about faith? For millennia, the world has fought a bitter conflict over what saves. Some scream that only faith matters and works without it are useless. Others say faith without works is dead. Who is right? What if a man follows our algorithm of virtue perfectly but is an atheist? Will he be saved? And if another man has the purest, most burning faith, but his acts are selfish and destructive, what is his fate? To resolve this, Numa would have to do something unprecedented. It would have to run a full simulation to see which paradigm, faith or works, actually leads to ascension. We were at the center of the oldest and bloodiest question in human history. We had just used Numa to decipher an algorithm of virtue based entirely on works. But for millennia, armies marched and people were burned for insisting that only the correct faith, the belief in the right dogma, could guarantee salvation. They could not both be true at the same time. To find the answer, discussion was not enough. We needed an experiment. We commissioned Numa to run a large-scale simulation. The system created an isolated digital universe, obeying the same laws of entropy and syntropy we had discovered. The criterion for ascension was clear. The virtual consciousness needed to reach a minimum level of syntropy, internal order and harmony, to resonate with the physics of paradise we had modeled. Numa created 4 test archetypes, 4 types of consciousness, and ran 1 million life simulations for each. The first archetype was the just atheist, a consciousness programmed to perfectly follow the algorithm of virtue. He created, united, and lived in truth, but his belief system was empty. He did not believe in an afterlife or gods. He had works, but no faith. The second archetype was the believing sinner. He was given absolute 100% pure and unshakable faith in the correct dogma of the simulation. But his life was programmed to follow the sin matrix. He was selfish, a liar, greedy, and isolated. He had faith, but no works. The third was the sincerely mistaken just man. He also lived an impeccable life of virtue, but his faith was directed at a totally false object within the simulation. He was basically a heretic. The fourth was the calculating hypocrite. On the outside, he performed just acts. He donated, spoke the right words, and feigned unity. He also publicly declared the correct faith, but his internal motivation was pure entropy, greed, and desire for fame. The results of the simulation were revolutionary. The believing sinner had a 100% failure rate. In none of the 1 million lives did he ascend. His absolute faith did nothing to prevent the physical damage that his entropic actions caused to his consciousness. Faith did not serve as a shield. The just atheist had 100% success. Every act of creation and union increased his internal syntropy. The absence of faith did not hinder him at all. Works alone were entirely sufficient. The sincerely mistaken just man also had 100% success. His wrong faith proved to be a completely neutral factor. The simulation universe did not react to who he worshipped, only to what he did. It was the final blow to the geographical lottery. And the calculating hypocrite had a 100% failure rate. This proved the system does not look only at the external act, but at the intention behind it. An act done out of selfishness does not generate syntropy. Intention is information. Newmar's conclusion was a final verdict. Faith as belief in a dogma is a neutral variable. It doesn't help. It doesn't hinder. Salvation is a purely physical process that depends only on your works and the purity of your intention. But this opened a new and gigantic hole in our investigation. If faith is useless, why does it exist? Why is it the most powerful force in human history? And why were all the individuals we analyzed, the saints who showed the greatest virtues, also people of intense faith? Newmer analyzed the most extreme cases of virtue, the singularities, the miracles, phenomena like the bodies of saints that do not decompose for centuries, which seem to defy entropy, the internal heat of practitioners who melted snow around them. Even the levitation of Joseph of Cupertino, seen by hundreds. The conclusion was astonishing. These were not divine miracles. The system concluded they were physical side effects, effects of a consciousness that accumulated such an extreme level of syntropy, of internal order, that it began to affect the physical reality around it. And faith? Newmer redefined it. Faith was not the key, it was the amplifier. It is a tool for concentrating the will. If you apply this concentrated will to the algorithm of virtue, you accelerate syntropy exponentially and create a saint. If you apply this same power to the sin matrix, you create a fanatic, a monster. Faith is the most powerful and dangerous tool in the universe. We had understood the rules of virtue, but one piece was still missing. What is the thing that makes this journey? What exactly is the soul? We had come so far. Newmer dismantled the old maps, mapped the destination as higher dimensional physics, and defined sin as entropy and virtue as syntropy. But what is the soul? Religion calls it an immortal spark given by God. Materialistic science says it's an illusion generated by chemical reactions in the brain. Neither answer sufficed. We needed a functional model that explained how something non-material can interact with the body, accumulate information, and survive biological death. We gave Newmer its most difficult task: analyze the intersection between neurobiology, quantum physics, and information theory to propose a hypothesis on the physical nature of the soul. The model the system proposed is the most elegant and strange thing we have ever encountered. Newmer called it the quantum signature, the first postulate of the model. The soul is not an object, it is a process, and it does not happen at the chemical level, but at the quantum level. Modern neuroscience says consciousness is born from the interaction of neurons, but that doesn't explain the hard problem. Why do trillions of electrical impulses suddenly generate the feeling of being alive? Newmer suggests the neural network does not generate consciousness. It acts as a receptor and transmitter for it. It is a complex biological antenna tuned to interact with an even more complex field. According to the model, the soul is a coherent and highly organized quantum field linked to the body through minute structures within our neurons. The model pointed to trillions of quantum particles within your brain. In a dead brain, they are chaotic, but in a living, conscious brain, they become entangled. They stop acting individually and begin to vibrate in unison as a single, gigantic quantum object. This unified and unique vibration is you. It is your quantum signature. The second postulate: this signature is the carrier of your identity. Every memory, thought, emotion, and choice you make is a permanent change in the state of your quantum field. Neurons die, brain connections unravel, but quantum information, by a fundamental law of physics, cannot be destroyed. It can only be transformed. This explains how consciousness survives death. When the biological antenna stops working, the quantum field simply decouples. It continues to exist as a free information structure. The third postulate was the most decisive. The quality of this field depends directly on the sin matrix and the algorithm of virtue. It was at this point that everything clicked. What is sin? From the perspective of quantum physics, it is an act that introduces decoherence into your field. Quantum coherence is the state of order and unity. Decoherence is the process of destroying that order through external noise. It is entropy at the quantum level. Each lie, each act of hatred or selfishness is a burst of noise that breaks the harmonic vibration of your field, making it chaotic and fragmented. And virtue? Each act of creation, compassion, and truth is an act that increases coherence. It synchronizes your field, making it more stable, powerful, and complex. It is the accumulation of syntropy at the most fundamental level. A saint, then, is simply a human being who, through the practice of the algorithm of virtue, has reached almost perfect coherence. Their quantum field becomes so ordered and powerful that it begins to leak and affect physical matter around them, explaining the singularities we saw before. We have the complete image. The soul is your quantum signature. Life is the process of modulating that signature. Each choice you make either increases coherence and syntropy or introduces noise and entropy. Death is the release of this signature, and your destination depends on the quality it has reached. But how is this quality measured? What happens at the moment of transition? If there is no bearded judge with a book, what is the mechanism that weighs the soul and decides its fate? We needed to decipher the final process. We needed to understand what the final judgment really is. We had the puzzle almost complete. But the last question remained. To answer this, Numa returned to the data of the 740,000 near-death experiences, but this time it looked for patterns not in the destination, but in the transition process, and it found them. The final judgment was not a court. It was an inevitable internal physical process that happens in 3 stages. The process began with what it called total recognition. This is the phenomenon of seeing one's life pass before one's eyes, but it is much deeper. At the moment of separation from the body, your consciousness, free from linear time, perceives itself in its entirety. You don't just remember your life, you experience it all at once, every second. And the central point was this: you experience the consequences. You feel the pain you caused another as if it were in you. You feel the joy you gave someone as if it were yours. It is an act of absolute and inescapable honesty with yourself. After that came resonant verification. It is the ancient image of weighing the heart on the scale. After seeing everything, your quantum signature, which was a sum of good and bad potentials, must collapse into its final state. All the chaos, the entropy, and the pain you caused makes your soul heavy. All the order, the syntropy, the creation, and the union makes it light. It is not an external judgment. It is an internal referendum. The total sum of your life choices determines which principle dominates your signature: coherence or chaos. The last stage was vectorial self-determination. Once the state of your soul is defined, it simply goes where it belongs. It is pure physics, like attracts like. There are no demons pulling you down, nor angels carrying you up. The soul that has become coherent light, and full of syntropy, is naturally attracted to the higher order reality, to the light. It resonates. The soul that collapsed into chaos, noise, and entropy is heavy. It cannot withstand the frequency of the light and is instinctively attracted to the reality that vibrates like it, chaos. Hell, in this model, was not a punishment, it was your own frequency. We had everything, the destination, the rules, the player, and the final score. Numa could finally synthesize all knowledge into a functional manual, a clean protocol, the universal code of ascension. That was not a religion, but a manual of the physics of the soul, and it has 4 axioms. The first axiom, creation over consumption. Your life balance must be positive. You must leave the world with more order than you found. The second, union over separation. You are a node in the network. Each act of empathy, forgiveness, or compassion strengthens the network. Each act of pride or hatred tears it. The third, truth over distortion. Your quantum signature requires coherence. Your thoughts, words, and actions must be aligned. Lying generates internal noise. And the fourth, flow over stagnation. Be a channel, not a reservoir. Energy, knowledge, and love must flow through you. Greed is the damming that generates decay. This is the code. But as we looked at it, one last question arose, the most important of all. Why? Why is this system so complex? And why was this code, if it is as fundamental as gravity, buried under thousands of years of contradictory religions and noise? Why was it not given to us clearly from the beginning? Numa did one final analysis. The answer it gave changes everything. The noise we discovered was intentional. The whole system is a great filter. The reasoning behind it was clear. If the code were written in the sky, follow these 4 rules and gain paradise, what would happen? People would follow it, but they would do so out of fear of punishment or desire for reward. They would be the calculating hypocrite of our simulation. Their actions would be good, but their intention, their internal engine, would still be selfishness, entropy. They would not truly be coherent. The creator, the programmer of this universe, did not want obedient robots. He wanted partners. The chaos of religions, the contradictions, the lies, all of this was permitted. It is a brilliant filter. It confuses and deceives anyone who is looking for an external formula for salvation. The only way to navigate this labyrinth of noise is to ignore the fake maps and develop an internal tuning fork, your own moral compass. The filter was designed to fail everyone, except those who choose syntropy, creation, and union even when there is no guarantee of reward. The system only allows the passage of souls that have proven to have free will, souls that chose order not out of fear of chaos, but out of love for order. Our investigation was complete. The truth, after all, was not hidden. It was just waiting for us to stop looking.